Redemption is the operative word of my pre-shuffle. More specifically, I heard the phrase redemption of the damned. And then shortly after, I heard redemption for the damned. And at first, I thought it was a correction, swapping out one for the other. But as I sat with it, I realized that two things can be true at the same time, as depicted in the card of justice. And that one simple word could change the meaning of that phrase and add a different weight to it, if you will. But it somehow shared the same overarching theme. On one side of the scales, there is atonement. And on the other, there is reparation. And I believe that that's the age that we are presently embarking upon as we speak. And I believe that where you fare upon those scales has already been judged, probably not so much by some all-knowing, unseen, intangible force beyond us, but it's been assumed through our very being, through the acts of through the essence of our human acts, choices, intentions. So we ourselves are the judge and jury of ourselves, and now carries out the sentence. What's up, everybody? It's me, Danae. I'm here with a message for you. Today is Tuesday. Yes, it is still Tuesday. Tuesday, August 25th, 2026. It's 3:02 on the clock. And I have no idea where we're going with this. But I'm excited to see it through. I hope you're doing well. All of that good stuff. So sincerely. You had a great weekend. Your week's off to a fabulous start, a powerful start. You're feeling rested and excited all at the same time about kind of closing up the summer season in the most optimistic way possible and projecting from that point of view to a fantastic fall ahead. Not to get ahead of ourselves, because I'm definitely not trying to rush us out of the summer. But we all know, like, well, at least here where I am in the Northeast, around about Labor Day time, probably generally in this nation, around about after Labor Day time is when it feels like summer is just about gone, even though we still have some time after that. So enjoy her while it lasts, while she lasts, or he, whatever you fancy. But let's see what we got. Two of Swords. Five of Pentacles tried to peek out, but it went right back in. Yeah, I'm feeling like that's none of your concern. I feel like what we're going to be dealing with perhaps in this message is a duality of reality, of which some may find themselves or have found themselves kind of straddling the fence of. But I don't believe that that's a position that can really be upheld for long. You're either going to find yourself on one end or the other. And the longer that there is a straddling of a middle ground, in this case, because we know that justice is balance, but this Two of Swords is reading two ways to me. Like it's either the indifference of being moved by, the indifference to being moved by things that don't concern you personally or directly. Whereas, as I said, you can have two things existing in one reality at the same time, very distinctly, and either depending on where you fare, particularly as that Five of Pentacles went back into the deck, the opposite spectrum may be perceivable by you or prevalent and evident, but it may not necessarily have or take effect. And again, here it is, as I said before, that's up to your decision to make. What I didn't show you is that on the bottom of the deck, which really was the top, from what was facing up with Justice, was the the Lovers. So it's all about making the optimal choice, as it's always been, but just with even more, with an even greater impact now more than ever before, to kind of pledge allegiance to yourself, is what I'm hearing. So give acknowledgement or resonance to things that are in alignment with that true identity, that self, and more or less maybe having to condition or recondition yourself to be unbothered, unmoved, unprovoked by things that may be perceivable but are not personal. And that sounds like kind of trivial, maybe even primitive, like duh, but we know that it's much easier said than done. Like, think practically when everything is fine in your life, but you can turn on the news, perhaps, if you still do that thing, or just scrolling on YouTube or any social media and come across like tragedies or things, current events in our nation that don't have, most of which, if not almost all of which, don't have any direct effect on you except for an emotional provocation, and it's like sometimes we can get lost in that impulse to attach, emote, to be activated or react and respond to things that, to put it kind of callously but honestly, are none of our business. And of course, there is the argument that, this is a collective consciousness, but I feel like the justice here, the true balance, the true harmony is the one that you find within yourself to decide to tend to things that you justifiably have a connection to, a relation to, can make an impact on. And to start, if it is a reconditioning or deconditioning, to do so as soon as possible, to start to disconnect from those things that are just provocative for provocative sake. And it's not to be calloused or to be, I guess, apathetic, or maybe not I guess partially apathetic, but it's not to be, there's a word that I'm looking for, like more or less like so careless and unconcerned for any like assaulting reason, like for any reason of to cause harm or to be dismissive or disregarding or degrading to someone else's experience. What I'm speaking of is really, is really full so full sail selfish as it may sound, is really a radical expression of self-care and conservation, so that you can lend yourself, your whole self, to as much of what you truly have the power and the will and ability and resource to impact and affect, as opposed to fragmenting yourself amongst the things that are not even assigned to you anyway, that may be siphoning more from you than they are I guess empowering you to be any particular force of change. So anyway, yeah, the Two of Swords is like, it's partially like not seeing and not knowing, but what I get is that it's almost a willful, I often see this card in the Two of Swords, I often see it as indifference. Picking and choosing quite selectively how you allow yourself to be provoked for whatever cause, for whatever purpose, by whatever catalyst. But for me, it's reading more of a controlled posture than it may let on the surface of its traditional meaning. Almost quite protective, as a matter of fact. Because you have to justify, I'll say what justifies this posture is acknowledging and accepting that there are some what's the word that I want to use? There's some triggers, I guess. That's not really the word that I want, but like triggers or things that, are that cause a reaction and a response, that are projected with perverted intention by forces and sources that have no other objective but to extract what can be so from the reaction and the response. So when you know that, you have to take extra liberty, supreme liberty over your senses to really consider what deserves your attention, your energy, your response, your acknowledgement, your investment. What truly doesn't, just without any thought about it, what truly doesn't. And of course, the hardest things to consider is that gray area, perhaps in this space in between, where it may have, once upon a time, something may have warranted a response, a reaction from you. And theoretically, it may make sense that it still should, but then the weigh-in of those scales is the consideration of to what avail. For what outcome? To what resort? What does this yield? The most sensitive, the most, delicate, I would even say, example comes to mind when it comes to family, where it might be a no-brainer to be emotionally, if nothing else, perhaps mentally as well, with the swords here, invested in family affairs, let's just say generally. Because that is a conditioning, that's a conditioned response, really, of humanity, but it's conditioned from birth, from the moment that you are socialized into some family or familial dynamic, begins the conditioning to be connected to it, invested in it, whether that be selfishly motivated, as we are as babies, where we just expect to be given to or to extract something from a dynamic, like just general care and concern and consideration and protection. And as that conditioning evolves to an expectation of reciprocity, whatever the case may be, is such a deep-rooted programming that it takes a lot, even after trauma, to shut it off or change it. And I'm seeing here, I'm making that example because that's probably the deepest and the hardest that of those gray areas that it can be for what I'm speaking of. where, let's bring it back to the operative word redemption. There may be things that are imperative to forgive, maybe even to some degree to forget about such a delicate dynamic as family. But here is the difference of the of and the for. The forgiveness piece, as we know, is for you, and of any transgression or disappointment or whatever, however you want to label it. But it doesn't always necessarily mean that the next step in the process is for that redemption to lead to reunion. And here, is a moment of, that can be a moment of conflict where what you've always known, based on what you've been groomed to believe, could say, well, if I forgive, then of course I can forget and reunite and reconnect. But again, to what avail? For what purpose? Is it even really what you truly desire on a soul level? Or is it just something that you would do because it feels like the natural order of things? How natural is it truly to who you have evolved to be on the other side of that willingness to forgive and to move forward? And that's just like I said, that's on an intimate level, family, relationships, partners, friends, perhaps. So I start there, but it can blow up and blow out to something far more expansive of just day to day, consciously choosing to be supremely selective with how you govern yourself in your life. What choices you will make and what chances you will take, and assuming full responsibility and accountability for however it's going to turn out. And in some ways, I'm speaking of that which has already been accomplished, tried and true for some, to reach this point of indifference where it's almost innate to you, like, nope, not giving that my energy, or nope, that's not in alignment, or nope, that's not worthy of my time, or just having a really definitive line about what gets to share space with you, people, places, and things. And I guess, because I'm speaking of it in an age of redemption, it's probably more important than ever before to keep that same energy. Because you may have folks running around that are seeking redemption through reunion and reconnection. Like, that's their telltale sign of absolution. And for all intents and purposes, it could absolutely be sincere. But, you know, I'm not here to tell you what to do. I'm just suggesting that that's not the absolute. Someone else's personal realization of fault or misstep or a change of perception or perspective, I guess, is not an absolute invitation. To reunite. As I said, two things can be true, and perhaps many things can be true at the same time. You can still forgive, still forget, still move forward, have no malice in your heart, and still maintain boundaries and distance with no guilt associated to that decision, associated with that decision, and no malice in your heart for whomever the distance is created with. Just a resolve that this is just what's best for your present reality. Even as you have an open heart for how that could change, you know, but being very definitive about what gets to be, and in some cases, what you feel must be, what has to be true in the moment. Because sometimes the moment is all we have. And there are decisions that I can reflect upon where if I hadn't made some radical choices in the moment concerning my boundaries, my well-being, my protection, my self-assurance, I might not be talking to you today. As a matter of fact, I'm almost positive that I wouldn't. Because first of all, either I wouldn't have had the heart to follow this passion wherever it would lead, and in a more bleak sense, I may not be breathing. I may not actually be breathing at this moment if it wasn't for choices that I made at a time that in some ways didn't even holistically make sense to me, because it didn't align with the conditioning that I was accustomed to. Jeez. Yeah. But following my intuition is what has allowed me to be at rest, but what also kept me from resting in peace. Literally. Let me get some water. Ooh, I don't know if you saw that on camera. It it just flipped off the top. Like, so fairly. I can't even deny it. The very opposite of the Lover's card. This is the Resistance. A justified one indeed, wouldn't you say? That here it is. Once upon a time, you may not have known how radical of a choice that you were making was a resistance of darkness, or how you might have been resisting the devil itself in some way, that it had shown itself or materialized in your life, possessed a space, a person, a place, tried perhaps to take possession of you through gateways and bridges that you refused access to on account through your strong choices. Almost blindly, that's what I'm getting. Like I said, like not even knowing how pivotal a decision could be for the future, for your well-being, for your survival. Not knowing how much so until way after the fact, way down the line, maybe still crystallizing today for some. But at some point in time, it becoming very evident just how, like, when you can, I'm getting chills, like when you can trace back, like, damn, if I wouldn't have done that, who knows where I'd be right now. If I would have kept hanging out with that person, if I would have stayed in that relationship, if I would have stayed home, if I would have continued that habit, that addiction, some of you could have cut something cold turkey. Maybe cut people cold turkey out of your life. And at the time, it may have even seemed like an unreasonable response, or an unreasonable, not even response, because in some ways, like, when I'm saying response, it feels as though it was absolutely provoked by something else. And that could be the case, but in some ways, like, imagine if you are in your addiction and it's all good, you know, or in whatever your habit may be, your vice may be, whatever. You haven't had an overdose. You haven't had anything tragic happen to you. You haven't had a bad batch of something, or a bad night, or a bad encounter. Just at some point, it just clicked to you, like, I can't do this anymore. Like, something about this is not serving me in this moment. Same for like a relationship, friendship, or, you know, platonic or intimate, where you couldn't quite understand why you couldn't be fully vulnerable in that connection, where you had an issue trusting, even though there was no evidence why you shouldn't, or fully, you know, submitting yourself, committing yourself to the dynamic, even though everything on the surface, on paper, checked out. And then one day you just decide, like, no, this ain't it. Or a breakup occurs and you let it be. You don't chase it. You don't try to reclaim it or rekindle it. something about a pivotal decision, like, really was not only a game changer, but perhaps a lifesaver in your life. It was the redeeming moment, the redemptive moment in this lifetime for you. And perhaps since I'm saying this lifetime, it could be stretching back to past moments in time. Who knows? We don't really know, right? Where at each turn of the life cycle, a certain moment of truth was faced. And maybe in some points in times, there wasn't always the optimal choice made or decision made, but you got closer and closer to refining that decision to put you in a place in this lifetime where you would have the omniscience, regardless of what's in front of you, what's seen and unseen, what's known and unknown. There was a certain intuition, as I said, or a certain depth of sensibility that told you to do something or not to do something in a way that there is no logical sense for. And the only evidence really that it was the right thing is whatever proved itself after the fact. No way of knowing in the midst of or at the onset of such a choice to be made. But now you know reflectively that this could have been like every lifetime before, where you became entangled, suppressed, maybe even destroyed, if it wasn't for something that you did at a pivotal moment in time that you really had no rhyme or reason to do, except for the fact that you felt like it was right. You felt so. What promise on the other side? Because this was the energy that was to keep you separated from reaching this destiny, healing, wholeness, self-assurance, actualization, supremacy in creation as a refined being in spirit and in flesh. You were never supposed to get to that. Not by this energy's intentions anyway, but this was always the destiny to be reached, perhaps lifetime after lifetime. This was the goal, but there were elements, circumstances, perhaps even, what's the right word? Alignments that impaired this manifestation from materializing before its time, and whatever its time means, whether it was safe to do so or all the everything was in a, in accordance for it to fully form, maybe even you to be fully formed, not to be missing a piece or a component, but to have like all systems fired up to reach the fullest capacity of your identity. But as I said before, the judge and jury of how this gets to be, we often defer it to the divine, the divine's time. But what if, as I've been saying, it's all been awaiting for there to be a refinement of decision and choice making and hearing and understanding and reacting and responding, even before there was this imposition of omnipotence from some greater beyond. That it was all being infused and filtered and empowered through us. To find our own way. And the grace of it all is being given, the leadway, the lifetimes, the space and opportunity to do so. And hopefully to be strengthened every time in our cause and furthered in our cause, with each complication or resistance or adversary along the way through that oppositional energy. But still, no less, it being the onus of the operator of the vessel to persevere. And be exalted. To exalt oneself. Instead of waiting to be that was wow. That was the delay. That was the delay. For I keep hearing the redeemed of the Lord to say so, to proclaim your supreme identity without waiting to be affirmed, to take charge and authority over what is and is not manifested of your life without dependently relying on something or someone else on either end of the spectrum to do it for you. That's what has been in holding for the stars of creation to literally confirm themselves. Not just a point, but to confirm their rightful identity. And of course, that happened, what did I say? Through the choices that were made in the dark, when there was no inspiration, there was no confirmation. If anything, it was quite the opposite. Damnation. First of all, for any natural inclination of humanity, there's that had to be grappled with, but also for there to even be a sheer thought of ascending remotely close to anything supreme, even by orthodox religious standards and conditionings, of which we've also been conditioned to defer to find safety in. So someone that had to bypass the natural condition, like I was saying before, what you're naturally conditioned to do before you even know who you are, really, then the corruptions of those conditionings, and also the indoctrination of all of the things, to the point where you can hardly tell one from the other, but it becoming a way of life and like a supremacy to, again, defer to uphold, to worship, all outside of self. To overcome all of that and still ascend in your an organic essence of love and light, you've been more than redeemed at this point. The redemption happened at the radical decision making. What's more than redeemed? It's like you're being, like you're revered. And that adds a whole nother layer, like reverence, the revered. That's a whole nother layer of ascension, perhaps for some, that still feel a deference to inflated humility. Which ultimately, I guess, is a guise of inferiority. We are the ones we've been waiting on. not just to acknowledge our divinity, assume our divinity, accept it, embrace it, but now to assert it. And I feel like this goes back to the beginning of what I was saying, where it's that gray area of what you allow to provoke you, to grab your attention, to, you know, incite you to react and respond is so important, because in the most primitive sense, not everything is going to be in agreement with this projection of supremacy. Certainly not everything that you've been conditioned by to believe the opposite, or everyone that is also conditioned, has also conditioned you by their conditionings. So it literally is imperative to kind of build a spiritual fortress, or an energetic fortress perhaps, around yourself that is impenetrable by peon energy. And that's no disrespect to any person, place, or thing. It's just what it is. Anything that's vibrating on a frequency so much lower than your own that there is no natural resonance. If it has to be a force, if it has to be a sacrifice, if it takes a great deal out of you, if it derails your path, usurps your purpose, that's peon energy. And it doesn't matter what it's in possession of, and what it takes to face, the mask, the covering of, the projection of. This is why it's imperative to recognize it on sight and resist, reject, redirect your attention immediately. Page of Pentacles. Some type of message or offering. Let me get one more here. To what, for what? The Queen of Cups. A penny for your thoughts. In this case, the rate is too low. And here it is, it's just coming right back around again, because the Queen of Cups, who is naturally loving, empathetic, nurturing, kind, caring, wants to embrace, accept, love at the very core of her being, is here faced with exactly what I just spoke about, what I've been speaking about, is the decision to accept or reject an offer such as the Page of Pentacles. It's just not enough. It just literally doesn't make sense. The only way a dynamic such as this is justified is if this is mother and child, or something that there's a legal requirement to be nurtured and protected. Obligation, I should say. Maybe even moral obligation to be protected, such as your child or your property or something in your possession. But outside, an offering such as this, it's just not likely that this is going to be a balanced exchange. It's highly unlikely that it could be. It's virtually impossible. And these are the considerations that get to be made of everything now. People, places, and things. Like, not only what's in it for you, but what is it requiring of you to connect with it? And is that something that's fair to be asked, and that you are willing to give impartially and perhaps with imbalance? And again, that's each person's choice to make. Can't be made for you. But what I do sense is that ignorance is no defense. I feel like I'm speaking to someone or someones that have learned to discern their worth over a great deal of trial and error and perhaps tribulation. And when you have that wealth of knowledge, that sophistication of wisdom, you are required, let's say, or I'll just say responsible to operate out of it. So if you take an educated chance on something that, you know, or an intuitive chance even on something that doesn't reflect its value up front, and it's not reversed, so there is value there, and it's no tea, no shade, but even more emphasis on what it is that you require or what you need and what you desire to maintain this establishment of supremacy. Gone are the days where you should feel like you have to almost prove that value through your sacrifice, your subservience in some way, your servitude, I guess, maybe that's the better word, your submission. That's old conditioning. You've earned the right to be to be I want to say like prejudicedly selfish or prejudicedly selective. It's like the divine's been waiting on you for you to set your price and to commit to it, to project that you won't accept a penny less. So that that's all that you will attract. Knight of Swords, what you after the Knight of Swords? Look, somebody just coming after your joy, pretty much. Exactly, look at this shit. Want to come disturb that that peace, that celebration, that that esteem, either disrupted or corrupted. Like, how dare you? What do you have to celebrate about? What do you have to be in good spirits about, to stand on business about? I'll fix you. And here depicted in these pictures will be ultimately redemption of, if they're lucky, the damned, and a redemption for. Damned if they do, damned if they don't somehow find their way back to that pivotal, back to a pivotal moment where they can redeem themselves. The miracle of grace for some will just surely be in the fact that that opportunity comes back around. And hopefully it'll be perceived as a blessing indeed. But maybe not. And as I've said, for those that are operating in your divine supremacy, it's really of no personal consequence to you. If it happens, it'll be great. But if not, you're already living on the most optimal level that was designed for you in this lifetime. For some, you've probably already superseded it in ways that you don't even understand yet. Because the initiation of that truth happened in such a seemingly trivial way that you may have yet to even connect the dots to its greater impact just yet. Oh, but you will. And it will certainly bring about a cause for celebration when you realize that just one decision away ago, everything could be completely different. And perhaps in not the most favorable way that you would desire for yourself. And those that are on the 4 side of things are realizing that exactly that pivotal moment in time is what has changed the scape for them in ways that they wish now they could go back and do over. But as I say, you can't go back and do over, but you can move forward and do better. So, God bless and Godspeed to one and all. All right. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Until next time, as always, I leave you with peace.